Ever since Plato wrote about it in the 4th century BC, Atlantis has captured the imagination of adventurers and academics alike, obsessed with finding out its location. But what if this classic story is nothing like anyone expects? What if the accounts of Atlantis having incredible advanced technology and then mysteriously disappearing was actually a description of a spat between brothers that lived here on Earth thousands of years ago? I've come to investigate one of mankind's most enduring and baffling mysteries, and to examine some startling new evidence and potential leads. I'm on the hunt for Atlantis. My name is Borgio Boulakis. Nah, I'm kidding. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 26.22 of Aquaman, Fair Seas and Following Winds. Apologies to Borgio Boulakis for the terrible impersonation. I realize that is not anything close to the man's accent, but I wanted something to differentiate his voice from my voice, and that's the best we're gonna get. That's all we're gonna get. It's all we got, guys. I'm sorry. For those listening to this episode who are maybe a little bit confused, I am dressed up as the explorer variant of Borgio Boulakis, often known as Hair Guy from Ancient Aliens. He is one of the hosts, one of the most famous people on the program. You might know his name, but he is generally referred to as the Hair Guy. You've probably seen the meme of him holding up his hands going, aliens. Yeah. That's me this episode, but for Atlantis instead. I don't have a bead necklace like he does, and I'm sorry I'm so pale, but that's just how these things work. My hair does not nearly have the volume of Borgio either. Like, look at that halo we got going on. Oh, gorgeous. Anyways, welcome to our finale episode for Aquaman. Author Geoff Johns' writing for this particular series can really be broken down into 4 overall arcs: the Trench, the Others, the Throne Crossover, and the 7 Seas. Structurally, I think that this is a really smart move for this particular comic. Thanks to the blank slate that the New 52 afforded Geoff Johns, he gets to introduce us to classic Aquaman, peak Aquaman, meaning that he isn't going to drastically reinterpret the character for this particular volume. Aquaman's portrayal in this run takes elements of both his Golden Age and Silver Age origins and basically streamlines them, fitting them together nicely for a new, modern origin. Johns isn't changing a lot about Aquaman, but that means that he can change whatever he wants to in regards to Atlantis, and so he does. He basically uses the exploration of Atlantis to create threats and challenges to Arthur, ultimately culminating in Arthur confronting Atlantis' true history and rising above it. While I have overall positive feelings about this structure and this particular run of Aquaman overall, I would like to point out that it is a little bit uneven, and we're going to explore that idea by looking at these individual arcs. The Trench story worked overall, for the most part. It served as our entry point into Aquaman's life, establishing his desire to live a normal life. It showed us his relationship with Mera, and it demonstrated who he was, not just as a superhero or adventurer, but as a person. And this is the part of the story that I loved the most, getting to know Arthur Curry, the man, in Aquaman. He is uncomfortable around people, he's emotionally distant, he doesn't seem to quite get humanity for the most part. But he does fight for what he believes in. He does his best to not let other people put him down, even when they just make jokes at his expense all of the time. And he still fights to defend people, innocent lives, because that's the job. He might not be like humanity, and humanity might not even like him, but he will still fight to protect them because it is the right thing to do. Arthur's father saw his job as a lighthouse keeper not just as a job that he was paid to do, but as a duty, as a calling. And Arthur views his superheroics in a similar light. It's an interesting place to position Arthur in DC's overall grander mythology. Batman, for example, doesn't really care what the average citizen thinks about him. His goal is to instill fear in the hearts of evil men. His goal is to dissuade bad people from doing bad things, not have the average citizen honestly know that he exists at all. Superman, on the other hand, does care what people think, and his kind heart leads him to reassure civilians when he is interacting with them and make much more personal connections when saving lives or defending people. He'll still do what is right, don't get me wrong, even if people disagree with him, but he just does so in a way nicer way than Aquaman does. I would argue that Wonder Woman generally does the same. The Flash is very concerned with public opinion. The Green Lantern's perspective is so off-world most of the time that I don't really think that they kind of care how people think about them. But Johns takes the time to ground Arthur in this story, to make him feel human and complicated and messy and not very good at being a personable hero, even if he is an effective superhero. This was the thing that perhaps threw me the most, is that he does superheroics like Superman or Spider-Man, but he doesn't crack jokes. He doesn't try to, calm people down or win people over. He just goes, I saved your life. I'm out of here. And that's even more than he would do. He would literally just save your life and then leave. No thanks necessary, no further elaboration needed. I love that about the character, and I'm really surprised that that's something that I connected with so much. The Trench, as enemies, weren't terribly interesting as characters, but they do work incredibly well just as a threat in the story. We do learn as the comic goes on that the Trench are actually a former part of the grander Atlantean society. They were one of the 7 kingdoms allied to Atlantis. After the fall of Atlantis, it looks like the Trench were sealed within the depths of the ocean, and they inbred and then mutated over the course of thousands of years into monsters. Which is a super cool origin and just a neat concept overall. Their design is iconic, bringing to mind the deep-sea horrors that humankind finds so alien. They're one part fascinating, one part terrifying, and that is what really makes them a thing in this particular set of issues. I just love the way that these things look. But it is a little disappointing that the Trench goes from this nearly unstoppable, ultra-dangerous threat in their first appearance to just kind of a mindless, personality-less crowd that no one really fears in subsequent stories. We did see a Trench queen at one point, and I'm assuming that she's dead as she hasn't shown up again, and we did see the alpha male figure that did talk at Aquaman, that swore vengeance, and he has never been seen yet either. There's no Trench figurehead to connect with. There's no Trench character who speaks for them. There's no one to represent who they are and what they want. And admittedly, what they want is probably to eat everybody. How much representation do you need to get that point across? But still, it would be nice to have some kind of figurehead representing this particular group. Especially now that we know that they used to be a society of some kind, it just makes me even more curious to learn more about them and how do they operate and what does their society look like, even if it's a primitive society. Ultimately, I'm left wanting more from their story than just, we were fish people and now we eat everything. Please don't kill us, Aquaman. It's a little sad. It's a little frustrating. This story is also where we get our first hints at Atlantis' history and the depths that it could contain, pardon the pun. And this is why I wanted to read these comics. This is what brought me to Aquaman to begin with. I know Geoff Johns best as a world builder. The work that he did expanding the Green Lantern mythos is legendary, creating dozens of new characters and concepts just ripe for exploration. That was what I was looking forward to with Aquaman the most, period. There is just so much potential in undersea storytelling, and this is where Geoff Johns really starts to do that aspect of this story. The Others, our second story arc, picks up on this idea that there is history that we don't know, but it kind of steps it sideways. Rather than exploring the lost history of Atlantis, which feels like the next natural step in the story, Johns chose to explore the history of Aquaman instead. We do get some Atlantean history, don't get me wrong. The Others arc is where we first learn about the dead Dead King, and the Atlantean relics that the others share as weapons. But the real focus of this arc, let's face it, was Arthur's personal beef with Black Manta. Thinking about it, I'm actually kind of amazed that this arc managed to do so much. It introduced so many new ideas to the overall Aquaman mythos, like the relics of the Dead King, the others as individual characters, and then, of course, the big thing, Black Manta. And I even think of this arc as the others story arc. Like, that's how I frame it in my mind. But really, this set of issues is basically Aquaman versus Black Manta when you boil it down. The rest of what's going on is just like topping on the beefcake hamburger. And somehow it works. I don't think the others is perhaps the most well put together story arc in this run, but the sheer Shakespearean drama between Aquaman and Black Manta is just so compelling. The fact that they killed each other's dads is terrible and poetic, linking the two together in a terrible cycle of violence that is perfect for the cyclical style of storytelling that American comic books use most of the time. The added fact that Arthur has spent his life since that moment hating himself because he killed Black Manta's dad. That part of the reason that he is Aquaman at all is to force himself to be a better person. Quite frankly, it's amazing in superheroic storytelling. Where Peter Parker's inaction led to someone else murdering his Uncle Ben, here, Arthur was the one who did the murdering. That blood was literally on his hands. While Peter bears the guilt of having created the situation that killed his uncle, Aquaman killed Black Manta's father, period. And he has spent every day since then working to ensure that he doesn't let it happen again. That's great. Conversely, Black Manta has spent every day since that moment working to kill Aquaman. And this fascinated me because of the sheer difference in these two men's power level. Aquaman's physical strength rivals Superman. Not like, some namby-pamby, oh, well, this character has slightly above average. It's Superman. A character who pushes Pluto around the solar system like it's nothing. Aquaman can punch this guy in the face, and he has trouble getting back up from it. That's a thing, guys. That's crazy. Aquaman's virtually bulletproof, and Black Manta, at the end of the day, he's just a guy. He has no enhanced strength, he has no increased toughness, he has no magical weapons, he has no spells or additional superpowers. He's just a man on a mission. And yet he still goes toe-to-toe with a man who could crush him like a grape. That's impressive. What ultimately makes Black Manta a real threat is his mind. He's a planner, a tactician, carefully working his way through the others in this story, circling the social waters of Aquaman. He goes for the physically weaker members first, Kahina and Prisoner of War. He acquires Yawara's Orb of Transportation, and then he GTFOs. He doesn't hang around, he doesn't try to glory kill anybody, he goes, I got the orb, yoink, I'm out of here. While Aquaman was blinded by rage, and he kept trying to kill Manta, even if it meant leaving the others in a vulnerable state. Manta kept his eye on the prize. That is super cool, and it does a really nice compliment to Arthur's bullheaded stubbornness, let's say. I've mentioned several times that Aquaman isn't much of a strategist in this particular run of comics, but Black Manta is a character who most definitely is. However, if there is one frustrating thing about Black Manta's story, it's basically just the flip side of him being a human being. Yes, he does hold his own against Aquaman incredibly well, but we also know that Aquaman could kill this dude in seconds if he really wanted to. Again, Arthur can fight Superman. One good punch to Manta's head, and he has no head. For all of his brilliant mind, relentless training, and combat skills, the only real reason that Black Manta is a threat, at the end of the day, it's because Arthur lets him be one. He won't kill Black Manta because he already killed Black Manta's dad, and that guilt still eats at him. But that means that Manta can just go around and keep killing people. He killed Kahina, he killed Vostok, and it's because Arthur failed to do anything to stop him before that. And admittedly, that is a morally upstanding perspective for Arthur to have, but it does kind of take away Black Manta's fierceness to me. It does add a nice moral wrinkle to Aquaman's stance on killing that you don't really get to see a lot of times in other superhero comics. The others introduced in this arc, Kahina, Prisoner of War, Yawara the Operative, and Vostok X, are a great expanding of Aquaman's life. As iconic as Aquaman is standing with the Justice League, I really love the idea that he had adventures outside of them. You know, you look at characters like Superman and Batman, and they've got these entire corners of the DC universe that are just dedicated to them. They have whole armies of supporting characters, they've got teams of supervillains, exotic locales, tons of stuff that really matters only to them, and it makes their corners of the DC universe feel real and fleshed out. The others help to do that for Aquaman. They are from all around the globe, they all have their own agendas, and like Arthur, none of them are very friendly. They all have their own social issues that kind of keep them isolated from others, or at the very least, social issues that keep them alone at the end of the day. Their designs are varied and interesting, their own powers are just ill-defined enough, leaving them open to interpretation and growth as future writers continue to write these characters. Their history with Arthur is ultimately what fascinates me the most, and unfortunately we don't get to see a lot of it here. We see just enough to know that there's history, but I do like the groundwork being laid. I really appreciate that. If I have any complaint about this story, it's that Kahina and Vostok both get killed, cutting any exploration of them or their backgrounds incredibly short, and I wanted to know more. I still want to know more. To be fair, we do see the others again, both in issue 21, which they star in, the first Aquaman annual for this volume, which I didn't cover because it doesn't impact Geoff Johns' narrative pretty much at all, and eventually they do star in the Aquaman and the Others ongoing series. I do hate that it took DC so long to publish a book that focuses on these characters. Like, I got all excited for these folks, and then you don't even do anything with them for like 2 years? Why even expand Aquaman's mythology if you're not going to do anything with it? If you aren't going to play with those concepts, just show Arthur relying on these people, explore their history and their corners of the DC universe, tell me stories, and publish comic books. Damn it! I'll pay! But we did, eventually, get Aquaman and the Others, which ran for a total of 11 issues, plus a one-shot that appears to wrap up the story. I have not read this book. I have no idea if it's good at all, but it has gone on my to-buy list. I'm not going to get to it anytime soon, I don't think, but I am going to get to it. This arc does feature perhaps the most unexplained plot moments or forgotten story elements, but the arc reads well overall, to be quite honest. The only complaint that has really stuck with me after all of this time, and it's been several weeks, is the final exchange between Black Manta and the figure who hired him to retrieve the dead king's scepter, because it just doesn't make sense anymore. We now know that it was Volko who hired Black Manta to get the dead king's scepter, which he then went on to use during the Throne of Atlantis crossover with the Justice League. When the two exchange the treasure for the scepter, Black Manta says something along the lines of, "Our deal still stands. In the aftermath, the surface is mine." That sounds a lot like Black Manta made a deal to rule the surface world after, I don't know, a devastating attack upon it, right? But author Geoff Johns then specifically went out of his way to show that Black Manta isn't interested in ruling the world during his Villains Month tie-in issue. He could have done that. He could have easily joined the secret society and helped the crime syndicate rule Earth instead of helping depose them. But he didn't. He fought against them. He was a vital part of the rebellion against the syndicate. He was one of the main reasons they got overthrown. The other weird part of this scene is Volko having access to a crab ship and soldiers. Now, given that Atlantis is basically the entire ocean at this point in history, I could believe that there's probably a sect of Atlantean society somewhere that does believe that Arthur is the better legitimate king and that they support Volko's actions in supporting him. But that is never something that we're shown in the comics. It's never mentioned in any way or supported in any form. We are shown that people are willing to work for Volko, but nobody ever tells us why they're willing to work for Volko. Johns also doesn't tell us why the people who did help him in the other story arc then don't go on to help him in the Throne of Atlantis crossover at all. These story elements are just ultimately glossed over and forgotten. What it feels like to me, and I have absolutely no evidence backing this up, this is complete conjecture, I'm pulling this out of my butt, is that Johns didn't know what he was doing here. It feels like he wrote this idea, that the basic idea of an Atlantean force hired Black Manta, and he wrote that scene in such a way that it should look like Orm. While the New 52 was a fresh start for Aquaman continuity, Johns did regularly use long-term story elements from the previous versions of Aquaman, updating them for a more modern audience. Longtime fans of Aquaman would have known about Orm, the Ocean Master, the brother of Aquaman, and suspected him as a potential villain. So we get all of the trappings of Orm with this exchange, but maybe no actual intent for it to be Orm. Maybe Geoff Johns decided he changed his mind. Maybe he just liked the idea of Orm as a sympathetic villain more than this concept. Maybe he only then got the idea for Volko as a traitor and then moved forward with it in the Thrones of Atlantis crossover. Maybe he wrote the others planning for it to be one of the two of these characters and then only decided that it was Volko after the comics were actually published. Depending on the author, comics do sometimes be like that. Author Scott Lobdell has gone on record to say that when he first introduced the very idea of the villainous onslaught in Uncanny X-Men, he had no idea who the character actually was, what their powers were, or what their origin was. He just thought that he had a dope-sounding idea. So I do think that it is well within the realm of possibility that Johns had an idea here, that someone from Atlantis hired Black Manta, but maybe he didn't know who that person was yet. Or, if he knew that it was Orm or Volko, he hadn't decided on who it could be yet. Maybe he even wrote it intentionally vague, so we would suspect Volko or Orm at the same time, but then he just wrote it poorly. And so we have all of these elements surrounding Orm that just aren't supported anywhere else in the narrative. What was the plan regarding Black Manta getting the surface? We will likely never know. But the fact that this is my main sticking point regarding this entire story arc, which was, 7-8 issues, weeks later after having read it, just goes to show you how little the small continuity mistakes really count when you're reading these comics. What I mostly remember the others for is being an emotionally charged roller coaster. It is action-packed. It is an intense story that I just had a blast reading. At this point, I don't really care that we never learned who prank called Dr. Shin. It clearly didn't matter, so who cares anymore? The following story, the Zero issue and the Throne of Atlantis crossover with the Justice League, is probably some of the just overall best executed writing that Geoff Johns did in this entire run. The Throne crossover is tightly plotted, it feels big, it ebbs and flows really well with a fast-paced moment and then a slow moment, fast-paced moment, slow moment, and it's got a major impact on both the stories of Aquaman and the Justice League. I really like the idea that Arthur feels most at home with the Justice League, who is really just this group of self-assured weirdos. They're all weirdos, but God, they all own it, right? In a way that I don't think Arthur ever really has felt comfortable. He feels more comfortable amongst them than he does anywhere else, even amongst the others. Even when facing down his brother, who he loves, or at the very least we're told that he loves, Arthur still chooses to side with the Justice League at the end of the day. And he really doesn't have to. He could side with his brother and just move to Atlantis and say, screw y'all. But he doesn't. This arc does also have Volko as the big traitor to the story. And in hindsight, I've just got a bunch of questions about Volko that I would like answered that I know I'm not going to get answered, but I'd like them answered anyways. We're told that when Arthur found him, and presumably when Arthur left Atlantis, Volko lived on the surface world. He was exiled from Atlantis by the existing regime, meaning Orm, and all that stuff's fine. It makes sense. It sounds right. I don't have a problem with that stuff. But then when Volko makes that deal with Black Manta, he's got soldiers with him. He has a crab ship, which, again, I don't know if that's a crab and it can choose to side with Volko or if it's a ship and it's just a thing you drive. But still, he's got one. He orchestrates an attack on a United States naval destroyer to set off the war. He is somehow able to hack the ship's controls remotely. And he also hacks the controls of the Justice League's watchtower when he is there. So, like, is Volko like a tech genius? Is he the Iron Man of Atlantis? We're vaguely led to believe that Atlantis has technology far beyond human capabilities. So I guess I would believe it if you told me that Volko knew that stuff, but we also don't really get to see any Atlantean technology. When we're in Atlantis looking at the city, it looks like coral. Their prison cells are bars set in stone. Their prison chain links look like they're made out of metal. I don't think I saw anything that I would be like, wow, that's some highly advanced technology right there. It makes sense that Volko would be able to hack into a U.S. naval destroyer. It just doesn't. There's nothing to support that idea pretty much at all. So where does Volko get the resources to do all of this stuff? Did he and presumably Arthur really have loyalists in Atlantis that helped them out? I'd buy it. You just gotta tell me that's the way it was. And what was the deal with the single dead Atlantean who washed up on Volko's beach, drawing him into the conflict? The only reason he went to Metropolis at all was because this dead body washed up on the beach and he was like, crap, I gotta get out of here. And that's it. We never got an explanation for that. Plus, if Volko is this veritable fountain of Atlantean secret knowledge, he knew all about the dead king's history after all, how did he not know where the dead king's scepter was? He is the one who hired Black Manta to retrieve it, remember? And Black Manta needed to kidnap Dr. Shin in order to finish that job. How, in the seven seas, did Dr. Not an Atlantean Shin know some secret Atlantean crap that Mr. I Know All the Atlantean Secrets Volko did not know? Huh? Riddle me that, Batman. Calm down. Throughout this run, I do enjoy the idea of what Volko represents in relation to Arthur. He is the closest Atlantean connection that Arthur has, with his mother being dead and his brother imprisoned in Belle Reve. Volko is Arthur's connection to Atlantis. He knows the politics better than Arthur, he knows the history of it better than Arthur, but he is also way more of a fantasy comic book character than he is a superhero character. And Arthur is, at the end of the day, a superhero. This simple storytelling divide puts them at odds, where the methods that Volko is willing to engage in are always dubious to the morally upstanding ways of Aquaman. Volko would feel right at home in Game of Thrones. Aquaman would not. That is some great storytelling tension, and it fuels their relationship every time you read a scene between them, and it just makes it spark. Ooh, I love it. We see this idea echoed in Aquaman's ongoing conflict with Orm in the Throne of Atlantis crossover, who honestly acts and reads more like a villain in a fantasy comic, or like a medieval age, long gone type of conqueror sort of story. He plans to punch this nation that attacked his nation in their national nose, and then just go back to the seas. His point made. But then he just happens to run into the world's most premier superhero team. You don't get to just kill a bunch of people and then leave. You have to take responsibility for your actions. That's what comic books are about. With great power comes great responsibility. Law number one. And Arthur has to enforce that decision on his brother. At the end of the day, Orm is a fantasy character. Aquaman is a superhero. I'm amazed that Johns made that particular moment when Arthur told Orm that he was under arrest. I'm amazed that he made it hit as much as he did for me, because if I have any complaint about the Throne crossover, aside from Volko's narrative not really making logistical sense, it's that we've never really got to see Orm and Arthur's relationship. I would have loved to have seen the two of them spending more time together, relying on each other, trusting each other, even when they met each other for the first time, when Arthur was a teenager and Orm would have been like a preteen. How did that go? What was their first meeting like? How did Orm react when Arthur assumed the throne the first time? And then how did he react when Arthur abandoned it to go adventure around the surface world with his other friends? There are all kinds of interesting stories left to explore between these brothers, and Throne really left me wanting more, in a good way. This isn't so much a complaint, I suppose, so much as it is a plea for more depth. I love these guys. I want to see the depth of their relationship as brothers. I want to see it challenged. I want to see it reinforced. I want to see it broken because one of them's more loyal to whatever than the other one is. I just want more, right? Unlike the Seven Seas, our final arc of Aquaman began as a masterclass in balancing multiple storylines. We saw Arthur working to improve Atlantis' image on the world stage. We saw the threat of the dead king. We had Mera in danger. We had Merc's mini-rebellion. And we had the Scavenger invade Atlantis. All of this works incredibly well together to push Arthur to the brink, putting him in what is ultimately an unwinnable situation. That's great storytelling. The more difficult the threats to overcome, the more satisfying the victory when one accomplishes it. We then hit our first hurdle with the Seven Seas story arc, though. The Forever Evil crossover and the Villains Month tie-ins. As I detailed in those particular episodes, Johns puts us in a really awkward place of, on the one hand, needing to acknowledge that those stories happened, but we also need to ignore that they happened at the same time. Aquaman is somehow simultaneously in a coma being watched over by Vulko, and he is imprisoned with the rest of the Justice League by the crime syndicate. It doesn't make sense. It can't make sense. And normally I would just suggest that we ignore Forever Evil and its surrounding story elements. Let's just read Aquaman. Go about our lives in peace, right? But then we see Orm living with Linda in Aquaman issue 25. Our final issue. Geoff Johns' penultimate issue. And in order to understand how that happened to Orm, we would then need to go back and read Aquaman issue 23.2. As a collector, if I'm reading an issue numbered 23.2, then I want to know if there's a 23.1 or 23.3. And then I would go, oh, there's a Black Manta issue. I loved Black Manta. I'll read that comic. And then I see that ends and spins off into Forever Evil. And then I read Forever Evil. And now I've got a continuity mess, and it's just not worth it. I am also annoyed at this Gordian knot of storytelling because not only is Aquaman's situation a mess, but his evil Earth 3 counterpart, the Sea King, is killed as soon as he first appears. Like, he literally walks through a portal and gets zapped in the back, he's dead. Forever Evil is an entire event that explores what the Justice League would be like if they were evil, and Geoff Johns has spent all of this time making Aquaman into a Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman level character, and then he sidelines his evil counterpart. Come on, man. I want to know what evil Aquaman is like. If Aquaman's whole shtick is ultimately bridging the land and sea worlds, then does the Sea King keep them apart? Does he terrorize them both equally? I don't know! And it clearly makes me upset. This leaves me wanting to know in a bad way because I know there's no answer forthcoming. Stuff like, oh, I love the others, but I don't get enough of them. Somebody could pick up on that and tell a story about it in the future. The likelihood that DC is ever going to touch the Sea King again is extremely small. We've actually seen, I want to say in 2020, maybe 2021, there was a new Crime Syndicate miniseries. I think a 5-issue miniseries. And I don't think Sea King even appeared in it. I remember the first cover was drawn by Jim Chung. And I love Jim Chung's artwork. If you listen to the Scion episodes, you know that. And no Sea King. Nobody cares. Because Aquaman doesn't matter. God, I hate it. And it doesn't help that I really love that Sea King's character design is directly inspired by 90s era Aquaman, when he had a hook for a hand. That's a hilarious nod and wink to continuity. And I totally forgot, not only is the basic design inspired by 90s Aquaman, but he's got Orm's color scheme, the bad guy color scheme. He wears purple and silver, the same colors that Orm wears as the Ocean Master. So even visually, the storytelling shorthand is just so on point for Aquaman. I just wish we actually got to see him king some seas, you know? And then, when we do get back to the Seven Seas main narrative, none of that setup that we got in the first half of it matters pretty much at all. Mera plays almost no role in defeating the Dead King and saving Atlantis. Merc and his allies play almost no role. The Scavenger is literally just ignored. And the Dead King is kind of beaten pretty easily. It's too big of a status quo change to just wrap up in a single issue to me. It's just too neat and tidy. And Johns does it because he has to do it, but I don't have to like that he does it. I do think that this quick ending was probably a sign that Geoff Johns wanted to finish telling his story before he left the title, even if it meant leaving some of his ideas or depth on the cutting room floor. I almost wish that Johns had just pulled a Brian Michael Bendis on Daredevil and just left everything on a cliffhanger. Having his run end with Aquaman in a mysterious coma, and then the new incoming author would have had to pick up all the pieces from there, could have been really cool. Mera could have been forced into a leadership position of a wandering band of rebels, which consisted of Merc, Tula, and Swat. Maybe they've even been forced into an alliance with the Scavenger, like they're hiding out on his submarines being shifted around the ocean all of the time. And the Scavenger's only alive because, he was crushed by that falling Atlantean debris, but, they hooked him up to, I don't know, a bathysphere or some crap in one of his submarines, and he's alive, but he's, trapped at the same time, right? And then maybe they need to hire Black Manta to free Orm, and then Arthur has to team up with Orm to find the other 7 kingdoms, and they all have to unite and defeat the Dead King. And holy shit.
No swearing.
They could have had Orm and Mera working together to check the Dead King, under the sea. The Dead King's I'm going to take over the world, and they're we'll work together to stop you. Aquaman ally with the others in order to find the other kingdoms. That
no swearing.
Could have been dope. The storytelling possibilities that Geoff Johns has. I suppose not Geoff Johns, whoever comes after Geoff Johns. The storytelling possibility that whoever comes after Geoff Johns has, if they get to pick up at that coma, is just amazing. Johns ending the Dead King's threat makes perfect sense. And from a storytelling perspective, it does give us some amount of closure, and it does offer Johns a way to finish this run out, but God, the doors that it forced to close that I would have loved to have seen open. One of those doors was the expansion of Atlantean mythology that I wanted from the very beginning of Aquaman, an expansion that goes nowhere, ultimately. With Johns leaving the title and busy with Justice League stuff, plus, making the DC Extended Universe line of films, he never managed to return to these ideas in comic book form. We did see an interpretation of these ideas in the 2018 Aquaman movie, which not only featured Atlantis, Xebel, and the Trench, but 3 more kingdoms. The kingdoms of the fishermen, of the brine, and of the deserters, which was originally in the Sahara Desert, but a catastrophe destroyed their nation. Given that Johns wrote and co-produced this movie, I do feel like these versions are probably really in line with what he had for the comic, but obviously that is unconfirmed, and nobody has picked up on those ideas and developed them since then. The Seven Seas story arc does end on a personal high note for Arthur, with him taking the throne and settling on a mission to unite the surface and sea worlds, and he gets to do so with Mera, and all of his present threats have been stopped. But I won't lie, this ending really just feels like a lot of hand-waving. What happened to Scavenger's men? Did Volko surrender himself to prison after the defeat of the Dead King? What will become of the Xebel people now that they have been freed from their exiled dimension? Or do they still have people in the exiled dimension? What will Merc, Tula, and Swat do next, having been seemingly won over by Arthur's conquest? And is Atlantis cool with him ruling them now that they know that he isn't a descendant of Atlan to begin with? We don't know. And that frustrates the ever-loving crap out of me. But that is one of the painful problems and joys of an ongoing American comic book, right? There's more to come. Geoff Johns might not have answered those questions for us, but a new author could always take up the challenge. Unfortunately, for fans of this particular era of Aquaman, the following author would be Jeff Parker, and he would not be continuing to explore the concepts of the Seven Seas. Now, don't get me wrong. Jeff Parker is a solid writer, He tends to come onto a book after another more influential author comes in and rocks the boat to kind of save the day, in my opinion. Parker's work is always good work. I enjoyed his take on the Red Hulk and the world building that he was doing there after Jeff Loeb left the title. I loved his run on Red She-Hulk. His time on Thunderbolts is my third favorite era of Thunderbolts, after founding author Kurt Busiek and follow-up author Fabian Nicieza. I know coming in third doesn't really sound like a winning endorsement, but given the sheer amount of authors that the Thunderbolts have had over the years and the wildly different interpretations that the title has gone through, coming in third is kind of the highest possible compliment from me in terms of your overall writing. Parker is perhaps best known, and best known's a really loose term here, for being the main author of the Agents of Atlas, the series that brought Golden Age character Jimmy Woo back into the modern Marvel universe. All of these individual runs are inventive, they're strange, with solid adventures and great character work. But somehow, all of them kind of tend to be forgettable. And for me, the same is definitely true of Parker's time on Aquaman. He does introduce some new undersea kaiju for Aquaman to battle with, a la Topo, but not Topo, which is a shame. Dr. Shin does return, and I would say I'm frustrated that Dr. Shin did not get more story under Geoff Johns' run, but maybe he was hoping for a longer run, and he was hoping to get to him, and then he couldn't, and it just happens. Aquaman does team up with Wonder Woman to fight mythological monsters, and this is actually one of my favorite ideas in Parker's run. It's really easy to forget that Atlantis stemmed from Greco-Roman concepts, and so does Wonder Woman, and all of her mythology and storytelling. So that means that there's a shared mythological base to these two characters that is rarely explored. So I love that idea. Parker does create a new bad guy, the Chimera, taking advantage of Paul Palletier's ability to draw monsters, which is awesome. And in a story arc called The Maelstrom, he would reveal that Aquaman's mother, Atlanta, was alive this entire time in another dimension. And she becomes a sword-wielding badass. That's all fairly big stuff from a storytelling concept. So why do I remember none of it? To be fair, I really didn't remember Geoff Johns' run at all, save that I enjoyed it, so, maybe I'm the problem. Anyways, this volume of Aquaman would end up running for a total of 52 issues and 2 annuals, half of which we've covered on Comic Book Breakdown, baby. Jeff Parker's run lasts until issue 40, after which author Cullen Bunn takes over. He writes the series until issue 49, when author Dan Abnett takes over, and god damn, that is like a who does Ben want to see write a comic list if ever there was one. Jeff Parker, Cullen Bunn, Dan Abnett, these are all authors who write solid, entertaining comics, but just never get the fame and accolades that they deserve in my eyes. Anyways, Dan Abnett writes until issue 52, which is when this volume of Aquaman is canceled. The title is then relaunched as part of DC's Rebirth event, which saw them relaunch their entire publishing line one more time, because why not? This volume would go on to last for 66 issues and 2 annuals, which has got to be some kind of weird curse. Aquaman can only ever get 2 annuals per volume of publication, which is oddly specific, but I appreciate the oddly specificness of it. It's weird. But this particular run would last until 2021, and then it too was canceled, and Aquaman has not had an ongoing series since. There is an odd complication at this point in Aquaman's overall narrative, because DC was planning to replace a lot of their major heroes with modern updates as part of a publishing move called 5G for 5th generation, as in the 5th generation of superheroes. But DC got cold feet at the last second and switched gears, killing 5G and kind of floundering just all of the setup that they did for those story elements. One of those ideas was a character named Jackson Hyde, who was the half-Atlantean son of Black Manta, who actually originally debuted on the Young Justice cartoon before his move into comics. He would become the new Aquaman, was the original idea. And there was actually a miniseries called Aquaman, starring Arthur, Jackson, and Black Manta, but once that series wrapped up, Aquaman has only gone on to appear in a variety of short miniseries. Last I knew, Mera was the Queen of Atlantis. Aquaman was kind of like her superhero boy toy, and they had a daughter named Andy who was like toddler age. I just saw them in the Knights Terror Superman 2-issue miniseries. And I mean, they look good, you know. Aquaman's got the long hair, he's got the beard again. I mean, he still looks like Aquaman otherwise. Mera's got a nice new costume. Regality suits her. Their kid looks adorable. It's neat. I would assume that DC is waiting for Aquaman 2 to drop in theaters before they push a new Aquaman ongoing series, which should be in December of 2023, so hopefully we'll get some news about one soon. I did see that they dropped the teaser trailer in the week of me working on this episode, and I mean, it looks like it's got a lot of bad CG, I hate to say. I'll fully admit, as someone who grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, I'm really cool with not a lot of CG in my projects. I like films shot on location. I like films with set design. When everything's just a single actor standing in a green screen room, I really don't care. It's frustrating for me. And that trailer, that's all it looks like. It looks like Jason Momoa wears a green screen suit in a green screen room, and it just doesn't do much for me. It's not a very good trailer, just overall. I do think that one of the lasting changes that came out of Geoff Johns' run overall was actually the way that Black Manta was written as a character. He was a super fun bad guy in the Others arc, taunting Arthur with a gleeful ease that just makes being a villain fun. He was a dangerous murderer, but he was also a fun, dangerous murderer, right? And like I said, he appears to have had aspirations to rule the surface world at the end of the Others arc, but then Johns just changed his mind and took him in another direction. Perhaps he fell in love with this interpretation, and so Manta was recast during the events of Forever Evil. He went from wanting to kill Aquaman and rule the world to someone who wanted Aquaman dead and then didn't quite know what to do otherwise after that. That's kind of fascinating. And Aquaman's death during Forever Evil freed the character up for some exploration in that direction. If you are interested in following Black Manta's journey, then most definitely read the 7-issue miniseries for Forever Evil. After he helps Lex Luthor save the world from the crime syndicate in that story, he is then given a pardon by the President of the United States. Manta actually seems to have moved on from hunting Aquaman and tries his hand at a normal life in the pages of The Suicide Squad, 2011. In that comic, Black Manta ultimately can't take it. We are shown him at a fast food restaurant. Like, it kind of looks like a McDonald's, and he's staring at the menu, and the guy's like, "Hey, man, you gonna order something?" And Black Manta's staring at the menu, and he just goes like, this is it. This is all there is. This is it. And he grabs the cashier's face and he smashes it into the cash register, breaking the face and the register. And he gets arrested intentionally. Black Manta cannot handle life as a so-called normal person. So he ends up being arrested and then volunteers for the new Suicide Squad. And that's the name of the comic, The New Suicide Squad. When the book then launched in 2014, he was an active member of the team, trying to do some good while still being able to kill people. I think that is a fascinating turn for this character to take. And I actually read the first issue of New Suicide Squad to see if I cared to follow more, and I did not. The book just didn't click with me at all. But if you do want to follow Black Manta's journey, then that is where you should be going next. I would also be remiss if we finished up this string of Aquaman episodes and I didn't bring up Secret Origins. Secret Origins was a short-lived comic launched also in 2014 that did exactly what the title suggests. It recaps the origins of DC's biggest characters. Issue 2 specifically features Aquaman in a story written by Jeff Parker that tells the tale of how Arthur was first exposed as an Atlantean. It's actually a really solid summary of his origin, and it shows a bit of what Arthur was like before his dad died. Issue 5 of Secret Origins then covers Mera, recapping her origin and clearing up a huge part of her character for me. It was established in the Seven Seas arc that Mera's hydrokinesis, her ability to control water, was a gift from her father. And maybe it's because I'm an X-Men reader, but that sounds like a genetic gift, like passed from father to daughter. We were then told that Nereus, her promised husband, also had hydrokinesis. And given that Zebel was an isolated penal colony, I would kind of expect some trench-level inbreeding going on, right? Thankfully, Secret Origins explain that the hydrokinesis isn't any kind of genetic trait, but instead it is a magical skill, gifted from one master to another. When Mera left Zebel in order to kill Aquaman, her original mission, her father was in kind of bad health. He then chose Nereus as his heir to be Defender of the Realm, and taught him hydrokinesis in case he died. So, Mera and Nereus are not blood related. Whew. Despite some basic storytelling flaws and a final arc that just really leaves a lot to be desired in my mind, this run of Aquaman is just solid comics. I found Arthur Curry to be far more likable than he first appeared, and a far deeper character than I ever thought he was going to be. Geoff Johns made me like the man more than I like the superhero, and that's fantastic, because that's the kind of writing that makes me want to stick around and explore more. While maybe I was an Aquaman convert for life, clearly I've not continued to buy Aquaman in the meantime, I am always trying the latest creative team to see if whatever they're doing sticks with me. And honestly, to see if anything recaptures the spark that Geoff Johns brought to the character. I loved the emotional depth. I loved his relationship with Mera, although I do think that Mera was perhaps underdeveloped as a character during this particular set of comics. She has certainly gotten a lot more spotlight since then. I know she at least has had her own mini-series, Mera, Queen of Atlantis. I know that she has been like Queen of Atlantis almost more than Aquaman's been King of Atlantis at this point. So like, Mera has definitely gotten a bump up since these comics were published. But most importantly, I really love the foundations that Geoff Johns laid in this run. If DC did not relaunch Aquaman as part of the Rebirth rebranding and just let the book continue on, this volume of Aquaman would have run for 118 consecutive issues, the single longest volume of Aquaman to date. That is incredible in my mind, and I really only think it's possible because of the work that Geoff Johns did here in these 25 plus issues. Next time, it's time for a break, y'all. There will be a catching up episode next week, as I have said before, in which I will fill you in exactly what went down while producing this episode and some general changes to my life. But then I am going to take 2 weeks off to catch my proverbial breath and just relax and be a human being who's not worried about grinding out a podcast episode every week. While I do honestly love a good long streak of episodes, like with Scion or Inferno or here with Aquaman, I do want to do a couple smaller projects for a minute, stuff that's just not going to require me to read all of these books and occupy this space for such a long time. I've got a handful of miniseries that I've pulled from my collection that I have not read in years, and I am looking forward to not just rereading these comics, but getting a chance to share them with y'all, because these are lesser-known niche books. We've got a little bit of fantasy, we've got a little bit of sci-fi western, we've got some war comics going on, just a little bit of everything, and then we'll see where we go from there. I haven't quite settled on which of the books I'm going to start with yet, as honestly, I have just been so mentally focused on finishing this Aquaman episode and getting past all the hurdles that both life has thrown at me and that I've thrown at myself in getting this episode produced. Both writing and then rewriting and then failing to save and then rewriting this episode again. My God. that I really haven't had time to look to the future. That's what I'm hopefully going to be doing on my 2 weeks off and get a little bit of a head start on whatever comes next. Right? So join me next week for a Just Chatting episode of Breakdown. Thank you all for watching this streak of episode for Aquaman. This is the first set of episodes where I have had actual videos go up with the podcast. And they've definitely been a little bit, like, in some ways they're easier than just my normal podcast episode. And in some ways they are more difficult. I had a lot bigger plans for this whole Giorgio Tsoukalos impersonation thing that I wish I could have made happen. And I just wasn't able to for a variety of reasons. But for everybody who's started watching the show during Aquaman, thank you so much for your support and interacting with me. A lot of the interactions that I've gotten on the YouTube page have just been fantastic. And they're just a huge reminder of why I wanted to talk about comics to begin with. Thank you to everybody who's posted about the show, shared the show, all that kind of stuff. That is amazing, and I super appreciate it. And I hope that you'll join me for what comes next. Thank you all. Love you for your support. And I'm going to go turn my hair back into normal hair. If you enjoyed this episode of Breakdown, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you are not subscribed to the show, then click on that as well. I love getting feedback, and I would really appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a comic or a series to me, Breakdown can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and on a variety of podcast platforms, with links in the description for this episode below, as well as the email cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Thank you for your time and attention.